Welcome to our technical briefing on the upcoming changes to the IA9100 standard. If you're in the aviation, space, or defense industry, this Revision A is a pretty big deal. Our goal today is to give you a clear, no-nonsense overview of what's changing, and just as importantly, why it's changing now. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's just ground ourselves in the core mission. This quote, it's straight from the standards forward, and it's really the North Star for every single change we're about to talk about. It all comes back to this: safety, reliability, and that drive for continual improvement. Okay, here's our game plan. We're going to walk through this in 6 parts. We'll kick things off with the why, then get into the big foundational and operational shifts, touch on auditing, and wrap up with how you can get your organization ready. It's a straightforward roadmap for the whole revision. All right, let's dive in. To really get a handle on the new requirements, we first have to understand what's driving them. This isn't just an update for the sake of an update. It's a very targeted response to what's happening in our industry. So the IAQG has been pretty clear about the reasons for this revision. The big one, of course, is aligning with the brand new ISO 9001:2026 Draft International Standard. But it's more than that. They're also baking in direct feedback from the industry to really beef up critical areas like product safety and preventing counterfeit parts. And you'll see a much stronger, more deliberate link to established tools like APQP and PPAP being woven right into the fabric of the QMS.
Now, this next part is really interesting. We're talking about a major foundational shift here. This isn't just about tweaking a few words in a clause. It actually changes the entire underlying structure of the document.
And here it is. This is probably the single biggest structural change in Rev A. The ISO 9001:2015 requirements are completely replaced. The new standard is built from the ground up on the ISO 9001:2026 Draft International Standard. So what does that mean for you? Well, it means you'll need to get familiar with the changes in that base ISO standard on top of all the specific ASD requirements. Okay, let's move on and see how that new foundation affects how we manage resources and processes. Rev A is bringing in some really modern concepts that frankly just reflect how we all work today.
And here is a perfect example. For the very first time, the standard talks about artificial intelligence. This new clause says every organization has to formally look at its use of AI. It's really a 2-part thing. First, you have to determine if and where you're using it. And second, if you are, you have to define and implement the right level of control. This is a huge forward-looking change that really acknowledges the role AI is starting to play.
And that new clause immediately brings up a pretty big question for every single one of us, right? How is your QMS going to handle this? This isn't just about ticking a box. It's going to require a really thoughtful, risk-based approach to a very powerful technology.
The standard also sharpens its focus on our monitoring and measuring resources. The language here is subtle, but it's really important. It's not just about having the resources anymore. You now have to prove they are capable of delivering the precision and accuracy you need. It puts a much greater emphasis on the quality of your measurement data itself. And this slide perfectly illustrates the intent behind that change. Now, it is just a note, so it's not a formal shall requirement, but the standard is now explicitly pointing to measurement systems analysis, or MSA, as a way to validate your systems. This is a pretty strong hint from the IAQG about what they consider best practice and what auditors are probably going to be looking for. Okay, let's get into the core operational clauses. This is where the rubber really meets the road, the day-to-day activities on the shop floor and in your supply chain. And Rev A brings some major enhancements here. A major focus of Revision A is, without a doubt, product safety. The rationale from the IAQG couldn't be clearer. The whole point is to turn up the volume on its importance by strengthening the requirements all across the standard. So here's the crucial update in Clause 8.1.3. The need to assure product safety is now tied directly to its impact on the end use of the product in service. This really broadens the scope, doesn't it? It's asking us to think beyond just manufacturing and to consider the entire product lifecycle from a safety standpoint. And remember how we mentioned APQP and PPAP earlier? Well, this is where you really see them come to life. These methodologies are now much more formally integrated, especially in the clauses dealing with design and how you control your supply chain. It's a clear shift from being a best practice to becoming a more fundamental part of the QMS framework. And speaking of the supply chain, this table gives a great snapshot of the updates. The standard now recommends using the OASIS database for supplier evaluation. It requires a formal, documented register of your providers. It adds a new requirement for information security. And it explicitly says you have to flow down the need for APQP and PPAPAP to your suppliers when it's applicable. All right, let's shift gears and look at how the standard refines the way we check our performance and react when things go wrong. Sections 9 and 10 have some key updates focusing on making our audits and corrective actions more effective. The internal audit clause has definitely been sharpened. Your audit program now has to explicitly cover the core processes you've defined in your QMS. And it has to include audits that are directly relevant to conformity, like product audits or special process audits. The goal here is to push us beyond simple compliance audits toward a more effective process-based approach that really verifies quality. And on the flip side, for corrective actions, the update beefs up the documentation requirement. You now must have documented information that clearly defines your entire process for handling nonconformities and taking action. This just ensures you've got a consistent and robust system in place that you can actually audit. So that brings us to the final section, getting ready. Understanding all these changes is one thing, but how can your organization actually implement them effectively and use this as a chance for real improvement? Well, the good news is the IAQG isn't just dropping a new standard on us and walking away. They're also pointing to some really critical resources. You've got the Aerospace Improvement Maturity Model, or AMIM, which helps you move beyond just compliance. And then there's the Supply Chain Management Handbook, which is packed with practical guidance for the entire value stream. Your central hub for all of this stuff, the standards, the support materials, all of it, is the official IAQG website. This really should be your first stop when you start mapping out your implementation plan. So, to wrap it all up, IA9100 Revision A is a really comprehensive update. It brings the standard into the modern era with things like AI. It doubles down on the absolute non-negotiables like product safety and supply chain integrity, and it aligns the whole thing with the latest ISO 9001 structure. And that, of course, brings us to the final and most critical question. The changes are coming, and they're significant. The question you and your team really need to be asking right now is this: is our quality management system ready? It's time to start that gap analysis, build your transition plan, and get ready for the next evolution of quality in our industry.